Now, for more on this, we are being joined by Principal Diplomatic Correspondent Siddhant Sibal, who's joining us live from Tel Aviv. Also on the show, we are being joined by former Undersecretary of Defense under George Bush administration, Mr. Dov Zakheim, and current Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
Now, Siddhant, let me come to you first. What can you tell us of the situation on ground? As I mentioned, the aid, that is something that's come out of US President Joe Biden's trip to Israel. What can you tell us?
Well, the situation on ground remains serious here in Tel Aviv. We know that this city came under a barrage of rocket attacks just hours after US President Joe Biden left yesterday. And now, of course, we know the big worry is that if the Israeli side plans to mount a ground offensive in Gaza, there has already been a build-up. We have been in the southern part of Israel where we have seen movement of the troops and the tanks. But before that, two things are the big priority for the Israeli government. First, the release of the hostages, and second, to send a message to Hamas that there will be a strong action. Ahead of that, we know that world leaders have been traveling to Israel, including an expected visit of the UK Prime Minister later today to show solidarity with the Israeli leaders.
All right. Thanks, Siddhant. Stay with us. I'll get back to you. I just want to now slide over to our guest, Dr. Mr. Zakheim. I just want to take your opinion on, your thoughts on this. Now, of course, the Rafah border is expected to open soon. But overall, given the plans that were there for the US president before he landed in Israel, and there were a lot of changes in those plans when he finally stepped foot on Israeli soil, what do you feel Biden achieved with his visit to Israel?
Well, first of all, you got it right. I am a doctor. I think he achieved a lot. And I think that had he not gone, I don't think Netanyahu would have opened that border. Netanyahu, I think now would probably use Mr. Biden's visit as an excuse to his extreme right-wing partners that he had no choice. So Biden succeeded in doing something that I personally had advocated in many articles I'd written, which was if Israel wanted to clear out the northern part of Gaza, it had to make humanitarian provisions for the southern part. So food, water, medicine, I would add, frankly, electricity to that. At least it looks like it's going to begin. And that was due to Mr. Biden's conversation with President al-Sisi. 20 trucks is clearly not enough. I have a lot of respect for Martin Griffiths. I don't know whether 100 is right, but 20 is certainly not enough. But it's a start. It's a very important start. And it's frankly a test of whether Hamas cares about the people at all, or is simply interested in just starving them out while fighting with the Israelis. So that's a major, I think, success for Mr. Biden. And finally, very, very important, Mr. Biden put the lie to the idea that it was Israel that destroyed the hospital. It wasn't. And it's not a matter of believing the Israeli Defense Forces spokesman. I happen to have been, as you said, an Undersecretary of Defense, and I put a lot of trust in our intelligence people. And it's our intelligence people, and not only ours, that concluded that, in fact, it was a misfired Islamic Jihad rocket. So again, I think Mr. Biden, on the one hand, reassured Israelis. He also made it clear that one has to be caring for all these displaced Palestinians who are innocent people. And finally, that he got Egypt to do something that it wasn't ready to do until today.
Right. Now, Dr. Zakheim, just based on what you've said, Biden did mention that the border crossing from Egypt to Gaza will be open for humanitarian aid. Now, the question is, when the aid does come in, who do you feel will take charge of it? Who controls Gaza at the moment?
Well, it's clear that Hamas might try to, but I think the deal is that the United Nations, I presume under Martin Griffiths' leadership, will be the ones providing the supplies. And if it is indeed the UN, I wonder whether Hamas would be so brazen as to try to steal things from the United Nations. It's obviously got to be an organization that is humanitarian, that is nonpartisan, that doesn't have as we would say in America, a dog in this particular fight, and whose only purpose is to hand out the food, the water, the medicines and maybe make the electricity work. I would very much hope that it is the UN and the UN affiliated agencies.
Right, Dr. Zakheem, stay with us. I just want to cut over to correspondent Siddhant. You're on ground. Now, there is no specific date which has been given, or a time, of course, which has been given regarding when this humanitarian aid is expected to come in to Gaza. When can we see that happen, and do you have any more inputs on that?
Well, so far nobody can give any time when the aid can reach into Gaza from the Rafah border, from Egypt, because yesterday Israel said that no aid is coming from Israeli side to Gaza unless the hostages, the release of the hostages happen, and this is the condition that the Israeli side has put. But even as we speak, we know the situation is deteriorating. We also know that Israeli side has said that it is targeting Hamas hideouts, but in the fog of war, anything can happen. While we saw the explosion in the Gaza hospital and we saw the blame game by the two sides, the Palestinian side, the Israeli side saying that it is because of the failed rocket launch by the Islamic Jihad, and we also saw the US president saying it's because of the other team, clearly blaming out the militant groups in Gaza. But essentially it could take some time before any aid can reach Gaza.
Yeah, Siddhant, also, yesterday when we were discussing with you, you were standing with a lot of families of those who have been taken hostage. Talk to us about the hostage situation. You did mention it a little earlier, while answering. What is it currently, and is there any update on when they can be expected back, or any talks regarding the crossover of the hostages back home?
Well, the number one priority for the Israeli government is the release of the hostages. Approximately 200 hostages are in Hamas custody, and almost on a daily basis there are protests here in Tel Aviv by the family members of the hostages, hoping that the government will act on. Now, this is a very precarious situation. Any show of force inside Gaza can lead to a danger on the lives of these hostages, and we saw how Hamas released a picture of one of the hostages as well, that increased concerns regarding the hostages. There are press conferences happening. There is in fact there are walls where posters have been put up of people who have been kidnapped. Almost across this city you will see pictures being posted of people who have been kidnapped. So there are strong concerns. The Israeli government is under pressure by its people for the release of the hostages, but nobody can surely say when the hostages can be released, and with each passing day hope of course diminish and concerns increases.
Right. Dr. Zakheem, thank you so much for staying with us. Coming back to you now, tensions and protests have spread across several nations in West Asia as well. There are now fears of a wider conflict and instability. What is your take on this? What should we expect going forward?
Well, again, I think Mr. Biden's visit may have tamped down some of that very, very dangerous situation you've just described. And the reason I say that is because even though there is clear anger in the Arab street, many of the governments that frankly did sign up to the Organization of Islamic State's condemnation of Israel have been relatively quiet about all of this. Yes, they've issued some statements, but not much more than that. And I think the reason for that is, first of all, Biden's very, very strong support for Israel. Secondly, because, as you may recall, he and Prime Minister Meloni of Italy and Chancellor Scholz of Germany and President Macron of France and Prime Minister Sunak of the UK signed a joint statement on October 9th, basically condemning what Hamas did. And there seems to be still a strong coalescing of those five in support of Israel. Now, given that, it seems to me that the Arab governments are essentially pacing themselves and waiting to see what happens and waiting to see whether the demonstrations will calm down. And frankly, a lot of it will depend, as your correspondent has made very, very clear, on how the humanitarian assistance actually materializes. It can't go on for days and days and days because there are too many people at risk. So that is going to be important. And I suspect that the United States government and the other governments are going to continue to press Mr. Sisi, President Sisi, to let more of those trucks in. To the extent that happens, I think it'll be easier for the Arab governments to withstand the clear pressures from their populations to take stronger action than they've done so far.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Zakim, for joining in and sharing all your insights on this. And Siddhant, of course, we'll be tracking all the updates with you on ground through the day. That was Siddhant Sibal, also joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you, both of you all, for joining.
Thank you.